I call this meeting to order. If the clerk will please open the roll and the members indicate their presence on the electronic voting machine. Okay, a quorum is present. If Madam Clerk will please close the rolls. Good morning to those in the room and those watching virtually. Today, before we jump into the bills, we will have two guests, and then we'll take up the Campaign Finance Subcommittee report. I do think it's important to hear from our guests to know more about the current state of our election system here in Virginia and the national backdrop of elections administration and democracy. Our first speaker is our Commissioner of Elections, Susan Beals. She graduated with her Bachelor of Arts from the College of Charleston and completed the Chesterfield County Citizens Government Academy. She has previously worked as legislative staff on the congressional and state levels and has served on regional and local boards, including the Chesterfield County Electoral Board. Commissioner Beals, welcome.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I have a brief presentation, about 14 slides, and then I'd be happy to take your questions afterward. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a review of the 2023 election, what we saw there, some of the changes and enhancements that we made at ELECT in 2023, one of our major projects, which was list maintenance improvements. I'm going to give you an update on where we are with Verus and the new system that we're building, and then talk about some of our preparations for 2024. For the 2023 general election, as you know, we have an election every year in Virginia. This is typically our smallest election in terms of turnout because there is no statewide race that's on the ballot that pulls everyone out to vote. In 2023, we had roughly 2.5 million votes cast for 41% turnout. And you can see the last 4 elections of this type there listed and the turnout. In the teens, we had sort of a 20% turnout. We're up and around 40% now for the last 2 in 2019 and 2023. If you want to look at turnout for the last 4 years of elections in Virginia, you can see that 2020 is the high water mark because it's a presidential. 2021 would be the governor's election at 54%. 2022 is congressional at 49%, and then last year at 41%. Again, last year was the largest election that we have in 8 years in terms of candidates. We had over 2,500 candidates because we have people who are running only every 8 years, like our clerks of court, who are up in that election. The other chart there shows you same-day registration ballots. This is the second year that we had same-day registration in Virginia. It gives you an idea of the rejection rate, which was about 2%. I spoke to several registrars and asked them what the rejection reasons were, and they told me that it was for somebody who was in the wrong precinct. Now, to be clear, when you are rejected, it is only your ballot that is rejected. You are still registered as part of that process as a voter. Some more numbers from the 2023 election. We broke down absentee voting, seeing how our absentee voters are choosing to vote. The largest chunk is our early in-person voters at about 500,000, and then mail and drop-off. All those other 3 are mail ballots. On the right there, you can see the division between absentee votes and those who are choosing to vote on Election Day. About 32% vote early and absentee, 66% vote on Election Day. If you want to look at early voting over the last 4 years, this is the first year or chance that we have to look back and see 4 full years of expanded early voting and seeing how voters are reacting to that. As you can see in 2020, there was a 63% margin of folks who voted early in 2020. They voted early or absentee. For the last 3 years, it's hovered more around 30%. That's kind of where it's settled in Virginia. Some of the changes and enhancements that we made at the Department of Elections in 2023 included rolling out a new election night reporting solution. We had to do this because the existing election night reporting solution that we had could not calculate ranked choice voting results. And in Virginia in 2023, we had the first ranked choice voting election in Arlington County for the Board of Supervisors. So we took that opportunity and capitalized on it and said, let's do some other things while we're at it, while we're making a new election night reporting solution. So we added front-end validation. That means that as the registrars are entering the results, it has to match, it has to even out and match your total has to match what you're entering in each cell so that we are sure that we have the most accurate results that we can on election night. Previously, that was not something that we had in Verus, and we were having to go back afterward and correct mistakes during the canvass process. So this makes them more accurate on election night. You can see there in that picture, we had an interactive map now that individuals can click on a county and see the results or the turnout, depending on where they are interested in looking. We had many more better data visualization options for folks. We also had reporting of progress indicators, so telling you where we are in reporting results. For example, if you're looking at your county's results and you see that the election day results are in, but that the mail is not and the early is not, you know that that story is not over and that there are more results to come later. And that helps voters have a better sense of where we are in terms of counting. Finally, for the first time ever, we produced election night results in Spanish, Korean, and Vietnamese. Previously, that did not happen in Virginia, so we're very proud of that. Some additional enhancements that we made in 2023, as I mentioned, we had the first ranked choice voting election in Virginia. That required us to come up with a lot of manuals and processes for how to count those votes and forms for Arlington. We worked very closely with the Arlington registrar on that, Gretchen Reineminer. She was fantastic. We also did a very robust voter education campaign related to ranked choice voting. We created a website that had, as you can see, that's an example there of some of the FAQs that we had that told voters how a ranked choice voting election would work. It included videos and practice ballots for them, so they could practice voting a ranked choice ballot and seeing how it worked. It also included information on how those results are calculated, so they would better understand that. Of course, we did our 2023 voter education campaign like we always do every year. This year, we expanded ads to Vietnamese and Korean for the first time, including both mobile ads and radio ads. And then we also had, based on feedback from general registrars, we conducted a working group over the summer to meet to talk about how to make the same-day registration process more streamlined. And they came up with a combined provisional ballot envelope. It's all in one envelope. It's a 8.5 by 11 size, and it has two sides so that it's easier in the polling place for people who are conducting that to do it right and make sure that folks have an opportunity to same-day register. We also had a legislative requirement that made us change the ballot envelope B for absentee ballots, so we did that as well. One of our big projects was looking at list maintenance. Just to start, I wanted to give you an update on where our voter registration list sits currently. As of December 31st, we have 6.1 million registered voters in Virginia, 5.7 million are active, and about 463,000 are inactive. I want to just take a quick second and explain what an inactive voter is. That is somebody who absolutely is registered to vote and can vote, but is someone who we have identified that we believe has moved. And so we place them into inactive status, which is a federal process under the National Voter Registration Act. And then after 2 federal elections, if they do not respond to efforts to contact them, they are removed from the voter rolls. Why are we focusing on list maintenance? Several reasons. First of all, as I said, it's federally mandated under the MVRA, but we're also looking at preparing for the data migration into our new system. I like to call it cleaning out your attic before you move to a new house, right? You don't want to take old, bad data with you, so we want to make sure the data that we're putting in the new system is as accurate as it can be. We also needed to do a little bit of a reset and clean up from the COVID pandemic and take a look and make sure that we received things in a timely fashion. And then this process ensures voter eligibility under the Virginia Constitution and statutes. As listed in the Virginia Constitution, the items that are considered for voter eligibility are age, residence, citizenship, felony conviction, and whether or not the individual is mentally incapacitated. This provides a look at the sources of data that we get for our list maintenance. As you can see, most of these are from state agencies. We receive new registrations from DMV. That is real time. We get those every minute of every day. That's an API that we have with them. We also get information from DMV on those who may have moved. When someone moves to a different state and they go to apply for a driver's license there, that state notifies us and lets us know that person has relinquished their Virginia driver's license in favor of our state's license. We're telling you this person has moved. We get national change of address data from Melissa Data, which is a data source that a lot of states use to do those mailings. A national change of address mailing, for those who don't know, is when you fill out the card that says you want your mail sent someplace else, and then we will contact you and say, it looks like you moved. Would you like to cancel or update your voter registration? We receive restoration of rights information from the Secretary of the Commonwealth. We also receive non-citizen information from DMV. People who self-identify at the DMV when they go to get a driver privilege card, if they self-identify and say, I am not a U.S. citizen, they send us that information monthly. We receive information on deceased individuals from the Virginia Department of Health, from the Social Security Administration, and from something new that we added this year, which is called NAFSIS, which is a multi-state organization that shares death records. One of the issues that we identified and that some of our registrars identified is people who were registered to vote in Virginia but were dying outside of the state. And if they didn't have a Virginia death record, we weren't getting it. A lot of times this happens in Southwest when we have hospitals that are in Kentucky or Tennessee, or mom goes to a nursing home to be with her near her kids and dies there, and then Virginia is not notified. So this is something new that we added this year. Felony convictions we receive from Virginia State Police on a monthly basis, as well as from federal courts, and then mentally incapacitated adjudications we receive from the courts. Some of the specific projects that we worked on this year, one of the things that we heard from registrars is that they were concerned about deceased voters being on the rolls. And the last time that I appeared before this committee in December of 22, I said that we were going to take a look at all the death records that we had at VDH. So we went to VDH, they gave us 1.6 million death records going all the way back to 1960, and they ran them against our death rolls. And what they found is from 1960 up to 2007, I believe there was about 500 people that had been missed. From 2007 to current day, there was 18,000. And the majority of that was over COVID. And the reason was that previously, VDH's coding in their computers would set, there was a distance between the death date and the date of the death certificate. And if that fell on different months, we didn't get it at the Department of Elections. And you can understand how during COVID, there were many people who died in their homes, what you would call an unattended death. They had a delayed autopsy or a delayed death record. And so those delays played into those records not being sent to elect. So when I talk about a reset from COVID, we were able to go back, clear that all up, and get those records removed from the voter rolls. As I said, we also did this new tool with NAFSIS for out-of-state deaths that identified 808 individuals that needed to be removed this year. 2023 was a banner year for removing deceased individuals from our voter list. It was a record. We removed just under 80,000 deceased individuals from the voter list in 2023. Out-of-state movers, the National Change of Address mailing, we conducted that 2 times in 2023. That was a recommendation from the 2018 JLARC study of the department that had never been implemented. And so we made an effort to do it in 2023. We ran that mailing in February and in July, sent that to over 200,000 individuals, and the ones who were set to inactive status as a result of that, they will be removed after 2 federal elections unless they take a voter-initiated action. A voter-initiated action includes showing up to vote, updating your address, doing an online interaction where you would update your address, anything that you would do to indicate, hey, I'm still here and I'm still interested in voting. I also wanted to clarify something else. I believe there used to be a law in Virginia where if you did not vote after a certain amount of time, you would be removed from the rolls. That is no longer a law. Nobody gets removed from the voter rolls for not voting. So you can register to vote and sit tight and then show up and vote when you would like to. Felony convictions. We had 2 different issues that we worked on with felony convictions. As I said the last time I was here in December 22, I mentioned that we had discovered that individuals who had been convicted a second time after having a conviction and then having their rights restored were staying on the voter rolls. They were not being removed due to the way the coding was written within Veris. So we addressed that to get those folks removed, and that happened in December of 22, January of 23. We had about 10,000 individuals that were removed. In September of 2023, we were made aware that there were individuals who had been removed for having a probation violation only and not a new felony conviction. We had an individual who came to us and let us know that that is what had happened to him. When we were able to trace him through our system, we were able to find that there were The information that we received from VSP included individuals who had probation violations and not new felony convictions. So we took several steps to immediately address that. The first thing that we did was we wanted to make sure that the October file that we received from VSP did not include probation violations. We fixed that piece immediately. Then we had to go and look at our prohibited table. When felonies come across, even if you are not a registered voter, we will still add you to our prohibited table so that you cannot register in the future. So we had to remove those people from the prohibited table so that they would not be denied registration. We immediately reinstated the 3,400 or so individuals as quickly as we could who we determined had been canceled in error. And then for the rest of the election season up until election day, we stood up a VSP call center for our general registrars so that if they were processing same-day registrations, they could call VSP and say, I'm seeing on my computer this person has a conviction. Can you tell me, is this a probation violation or is this a felony? I want to make sure I get it right. As you know, in May of 2023, the department left ERIC, and we worked in several different ways to replace the functionality of ERIC. One of the things that we identified early on is that we were able to get data from more states than were in ERIC. ERIC has 25 states that we were receiving data from. We are now able to get data from 40 states. That is through a partnership that we have with the DMV. What I spoke to earlier about how we receive license surrenders, they are giving us that data on a regular basis so that we can identify those individuals and contact them to let them know, we think you've moved out of state, would you like to cancel your registration? In addition, we successfully procured 6 state-to-state bilateral agreements for sharing voter list data and vote history data. We created or sort of brought back out of mothballs a hopper within Veris to process these. We also, as I said, did some work around the national change of address mailing and identifying a new data source for that with Melissa Data. That contract is signed and the data testing for that is complete. And we are in the process of securing a direct connection to the Social Security Administration for our death data. We did receive that for 2023, and for 2024, we do not need to receive that until October of this year. So that is in process. One of the things that I was asked to speak about was Veris enhancements and what we are doing to make sure that Veris is going to take us through the presidential without issue. As you know, Veris is an older system. It was built in 2007. Many of the things in it are hard-coded. It is very difficult to change. It's not terribly flexible. We did have a new CTO that we hired this year who has gone gangbusters in trying to get Veris shored up, but also address some of the easy things that we can do to make it work better. The first of those was to clean out years of technical debt to make it work faster and more efficiently. We have initiated health checks for Veris every single morning at 6:30 a.m. to make sure that it is online and it is working. We also installed an alert function for DMV registrations because of the issue that we had last year. So an alarm goes off when we stop receiving registrations for any reason. We know that it works because when DMV does maintenance on their servers, the alarm goes off, and we know that it's working. Additionally, we have set up quarterly meetings with DMV to increase the communication and collaboration with that agency to make sure that we're talking to each other on a regular basis. We have tried to reduce the wait times for general registrars. One of the chief complaints that they had was it took them a long time to print reports. And during early voting, there are only certain reports that they have to print. So we've tried to optimize that by making only certain reports available during peak times so that those reports will print more quickly for them. We also moved it to its own server to make it work more quickly. And then finally, we've partnered with VITA to improve our relationship there. What we found is that our IT people and their contractors with Unisys got along quite well. And so they have their own persistent chat now, back and forth, talking to each other and working together so that if something comes up, they literally text one another. It's a much quicker alert that something is going on. We've also increased our server capacity there from 8 to 16. One of the things that I did want to mention to you all is that I would ask you to please be aware that any legislative change with an enactment date of July 1 is going to be making changes and spending money on a system that we are getting ready to mothball. Also, it is a very short time frame for us to make any changes to Veris. Typically, those bills are signed in April. If the enactment date is July 1, that's about 60 days that we would have to make a change for a system that we are getting ready to sunset. So we would respectfully request that you reach out to us and see what we can do to get a mod to the contract, to the new system, so that we can include it in there if possible. The new statewide voter registration system is in development. The Virginia sandbox on that has been stood up. Just to recap for those of you who might be new, we signed a contract with the vendor in November of 2022, began a planning process, and started building this past year. We've created over 2,300 test stories. For those of you who are not IT natives, that's to test and build for any user scenario, whether it be a GR or a member of the public. The vendor has 6 teams that they are leveraging for development work, in addition to elect staff who are serving as subject matter experts and testers of what they create. And this is going to operate as a platform as a service. And you ask, well, why is that important? Because it gives us flexibility. We are able to have configurable modules where we're not just stacking new requirements on top of it, we're actually configuring it. So we're very excited about that prospect, as we know that there are more legislative changes to come, and we need to be able to react to those quickly. As I said, the target for completion is spring 2025 for that project. Preparing for the 2024 elections. As you know, we have 3 major elections in Virginia in 2024. Today is the first day of early voting for the presidential primary, so happy Election Day. We are going to have 135 days of early voting in Virginia, or 4.5 months. That's going to require a lot of officers of election. We need about 20,000 of them. And we would really appreciate your help in the remarks that you make to your constituents and encourage them to sign up to be an officer of election. They can contact their general registrar, they can go on our website and sign up, but we definitely need a lot of help this year. Some of the things that we are looking to the future on and trying to make sure that we have in place for 2024 is focusing again on data best practices for list maintenance. We created a data dictionary, and you might ask, well, why would you do that? That's so that we know the definitions of the things that we're entering, and everybody shares in knowing what that definition is of that item. Also, we've added more validation for our data quality to try to make sure that we have better data. We developed a significant amount of new training for the field. That is also a JLARC recommendation. We have, in the past year, we have created same-day registration training. We have created ADA accessibility for polling places training. We've worked very closely with the Disability Law Center to ensure that all of our polling places are ADA accessible. We have created new officer of election and election observer training, and training on conducting risk-limiting audits. I don't know if everyone is aware, but every single locality in Virginia will conduct a risk-limiting audit after the 2024 presidential election. The way that the code is written, every locality has to conduct one every 4 years, and a presidential election is a very easy time for us to just get everybody in and make sure that they have conducted one. We are working very hard with customer service to our general registrars. We've surveyed them several times. You're going to see the results of a latest survey in the post-election report, which we're working on now. I personally have tried very hard to get out of Richmond and visit our registrars. I'm up to 79 now, so I'm committed to making my way all the way through 133. We've also tried to tailor our communications to them to make it easier for them. They're getting hit with advisories from us all the time. One of the things we initiated just recently is a weekly digest, so they can go back and see everything that came out from Elect that week, and they can see what are the items that are actionable. We're going to continue to work with our state resources to align investments with Elect requirements, and obviously conduct our machine testing and post-election audits. We've also done a lot of work around translations. We have installed a website widget so that you can translate our website into almost any language. But we've also gone further. Like I said, we made sure that election results were translated, and we've gone and looked at our voter documents and our candidate bulletins and gotten those specifically translated as well into multiple languages. Just for your awareness, we have 4 languages, according to the Department of Justice, that are considered covered in Virginia. That's English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Korean. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your remarks. Do any members have any questions? If so, please use your request to speak button. I see Delegate Sickles.
Thanks for coming, Ms. Beals. We know that we've given you a lot of work, and you and the registrars have done a lot of work over the years to open up our voting system and make it more accessible to Virginians. I know there's people out there that don't believe that there are fair elections being conducted in America, but I hope they don't think that about our state. But you do read things in the paper. I wanted to ask you about, there's a little bit of whiplash with your exit from ERIC. In September 22, in your annual report on list maintenance, you write the data quality from the ERIC program is significantly better than other interstate exchange programs and any program that ELEC could operate in-house with existing resources. That was your report. The ERIC membership costs are less than the costs incurred if ELEC were required to create and manage an in-house program, resulting in the same quality of data. And I know North Carolina and Tennessee were never part of ERIC, and I don't think being part of ERIC prohibited you from doing a bilateral with another state. But all of a sudden, according to your testimony this morning and in your list maintenance report from this year, you started to getting worried about things in December 22 and reading the JLARC report from 2018. And so I don't know what happened over that time, but the resignation letter that you wrote to ERIC was pretty startling. I mean, you accused them of being political. You're going to start a new one in an apolitical fashion. You implied that you had negotiations going on with ERIC to try to fix their problem. You say the inability to implement meaningful reform, led to this decision. You accused them of sharing voting data with other people outside the compact. They of course, strongly denied that this ever happened. And you accused them of using the data for political purposes. I mean, where did that come from? I mean, we were in session in January 2023. We didn't hear anything about their problems with ERIC, which was a $37,000 expenditure, very cost-effective program. And, so when we got this letter in May, just a few months later, you've been trying to make reform. Could you tell us about how this transition happened from a wonderful agency that you reported in September to the time you wrote this really kind of testy letter resigning in May?
In the summer of 2022, we had an ERIC board meeting where there was a request made to consider reforms. And a working group was created within ERIC that was made up of both Republican-led states and Democrat-led states to look at those proposals. That group met, and in December of 2022, they came back with a unanimous decision to support two different reforms to the ERIC bylaws. In January and February, that agreement fell apart and fell along partisan lines, and then there was a refusal to reform in the board meetings in February and March of 2023. So we did not react immediately to that like some of the other states did. We took a close look at what we thought our capabilities were to replace the functionality of ERIC and made the decision to go ahead and diversify our data sources, take more control of our data, not rely on just one source for all of our list maintenance. As you said, I was concerned about the lack of reform in the organization despite months-long efforts. And we determined that we could get access to more data while diversifying our data sources.
Madam Chair, follow-up.
Delegate Sickles?
Yeah. What were the reforms you were seeking? What were they doing wrong?
There was a mailing that was required of states, and we wanted to see if that could be optional for states. If they wanted to engage in that, they could. There were also concerns about members of the board who were being overtly political, who were not representing states in some of their actions.
Madam Chair, could you be a little bit more specific on what the actions they were doing? My understanding is that ERIC, as part of their process, would send a letter to eligible voters who were not registered. So people that are over, voting age eligible and were not registered, and ERIC would send them a note to say, hey, you're eligible to vote in Virginia. Why don't you go get registered? And that was what you found offensive?
That mailing in 2022 cost the department over $200,000, and because we have basically automatic voter registration in Virginia, every single person who walks into a DMV is given the opportunity to register. In addition, they are given that opportunity with any interaction they have with a state agency.
Follow up, Madam Speaker.
You have the floor.
Madam Chair. So this was going on, but you didn't think it was important enough to tell this committee, tell the General Assembly. We actually fund your agency, and you were really worried about this letter to unregistered voters, and we did not know that was a problem. We'd like to be involved, especially, we have 3 branches of government. We're the branch that decides how to spend the money. I'm disappointed that we were kept in the dark, and then we got this letter resigning from an organization that, was well respected around the country and was very cost effective in what they do, according to your own report.
Is there a question that I can answer?
The question is, why didn't you tell us last session that you had a problem with Eric and you were thinking about resigning? Especially after we're led to believe that everything was really good and it was a terrific program. We helped start it. It started under Governor Bob McDonnell, and we were one of the original states, and we left it because they sent a letter to unregistered voters, and we didn't like that. But we did not know that was a reason. So we would just like a little transparency. And here's a question. Don't you think we would be surprised by the letter you sent on May 11th? That would surprise us?
Madam Chair, Delegate Sickles, the conversations around the reform efforts were ongoing in February and March when you all were in session, and that would be the reason that there was not an update to you at that time.
Okay.
Delegate Krisak.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you about the inactive voter list, Madam Chair. My parents live with me, and sadly they died around election time. But within 3 weeks, they received letters from the registrar saying that they were taken off the rolls, and if there was any problem, to contact the registrar. Do you do something like that with the inactive voter list? Is there a final notification or some notice sent to people?
Yes, sir, there is.
Can you tell us what is this? Is it similar to that? Does it give them an opportunity to contact and get back on to be considered active?
It does, and anybody who finds themselves on the inactive list is as a result of not responding to mailings within 30 days. So they had been mailed before they ever end up on the inactive list. And then if they are removed from the list, they are notified.
Delegate LaVere Bowling.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question for the presenter is, are there any more list maintenance problems since last summer involving voters being removed erroneously and then needing to be reinstated outside of what we've already discussed?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Delegate Bloxham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is actually more on the ease of signing up for the election. So when you go into DMV, it asks you if you want to sign up to vote. And now that, with my bill anyway, it allows non-residents to get a driver's license, what's the steps to make sure that non-residents are not signing up or are not being on the voter roll?
So there's a series of screens that are presented to an individual when you go to the DMV. It's kind of like a credit card machine, and it asks you to go through certain screens. And there's a screen that specifically asks you if you are a U.S. citizen.
So if by language barrier, a person who's not a resident says yes, yes, answers that, is there something on the backside that keeps them from being registered or putting on the voter register list?
Also conducts what's called the SAVE process, which is just for individuals who are not citizens. It takes all of their documents and runs them through DHS, and then we are notified every month of a list of individuals who are non-citizens to add to our prohibited table. Thank you. Sure.
Delegate Milday.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. I'm going to put forward 3 questions and then wait for answers if that's permissible. I'm still learning the ropes. I'm new at this.
Delegate Milday, can you do one at a time?
One at a time. Commissioner Beals, thank you for coming here. As I said, I'm new, and what I just heard sounds like we're doing a really a great job. The highest turnout we've seen, at least recently, on an off year. Only a few hundred people who tried to register and vote the same day that couldn't, and they were turned away because they were in the wrong polling place. So it looks like you guys and us, the General Assembly by extension, are doing a pretty bang-up job. I'm curious, and this is it's a joke in some circles about dead people voting, but I wonder, with all those dead people being removed from the rolls, if you run across people who have someone has tried to vote with a dead person's identity, and what you do if you find someone like that.
So certainly if we find any examples of that, we turn that over to the Attorney General's office for investigation and prosecution. Of the individuals that we did remove, we did find that some of them did have voter credit. And what we found when we did some further inspection was that those were individuals who voted during particularly in 2020, in the early portion of early voting, and then they died of COVID before Election Day. And I know that I had a couple instances when I was standing outside every day of 45 days of early voting in Chesterfield County with the lines of thousands of people who were lined up to vote. I would have an individual come to me and say, you know, my father-in-law mailed his absentee ballot back. He died the next week of COVID. What do we do? And when you put that ballot in the mail, it is considered cast. And so that's why that individual would have voter credit while also being dead.
Madam Chair, follow up.
Delegate Milday.
But you did not find anyone who had where somebody's identity was stolen or used.
We did, but Madam Chair, Delegate Mildy, I would be frank with you and tell you it's very difficult to determine if someone's identity has been stolen when it relates to voting. You know, if somebody walks in and says, I don't have an ID and I'm just going to sign a confirmation statement, obviously they're not signing their name. They're going to sign the name of the person that they're voting for. So what evidence it's very hard for us to go back and figure out who that person was that impersonated somebody else, if that in fact happened.
I see. Madam Chair, my next question.
Last one.
Okay. I think you said that 10,000 people who had their rights restored, felons who had their rights restored to vote, subsequently lost them again. Is that in a year's period of time or over?
No, that was many years. Right. We saw a large uptick in the number of individuals having their rights restored over the last two administrations, and so that was what presented that particular issue where those people had their rights restored and now they're reoffending and needing to be removed from their roles.
Do you recall how many people in that same period?
Delegate Milday?
Oh, excuse me.
That was your last question.
Okay,
Thank you. Delegate O'Quinn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for the Commissioner. So back to the to Eric piece for just a second. You know, I know that sometimes organizations are founded under one set of principles and have one set of leaders, and it may be a professional organization or a civic organization or a political organization for that matter. And as leaders change and whatnot, the organization tends to morph into something that maybe it wasn't when it originally started. So I don't know. I haven't been here as long as Delegate Sickles. I don't know exactly. Okay. I don't know exactly the principles that this was founded on when Governor McDonnell, you know, entered into ERIC and was part of the founders. That being said, if I understood correctly, I was trying to go back through the presentation, and I don't think I can look at that from here. So my question is, am I correct that you said we now have information that we can share from 40 states as opposed to, was it 25?
That's correct.
Additional question, Madam Chair. Madam Commissioner, so I guess what I would ask is, do you feel like that additional 15 states has been a net positive for you all, or, I mean, has it been a wash? Do you feel like you're getting more information to help you be able to execute your duties more effectively?
Certainly having an additional 15 states of data helps us track people who have left the Commonwealth and need to update their registration. Additionally, those 6 MOUs that we pursued, we were able to secure an MOU with Tennessee, which we have never had before. Tennessee was never a member of ERIC. So that is a positive as well because they're one of our border states.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, and so just want to make sure I'm understanding. So there was nothing that precluded you while being in ERIC with pursuing MOUs with other states that were not in ERIC?
That's correct.
Delegate Cole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Beals, good morning. Thank you for being here. Back in the summer of 2023, this past summer, we saw reports of Sunday voting closed down by electoral boards in localities, and we also saw early voting locations shut down by localities. And these were specifically in Black and brown communities. I'm just curious to see if there's any guidelines that's being sent down to protect those locations and to ensure Black and brown people do have access to the polls and are not being ostracized against.
The instances that we saw of that caused us to go ahead and issue guidance from the department. When localities passed their ordinances to allow for early voting, different localities did it differently. So, for example, I live in Chesterfield County. In Chesterfield, they said, we're going to have satellite locations only for general elections and not for primaries. And so what we did is we sent guidance to our locals and said, make sure before you make any changes, you were taking a very close look at the ordinance that was passed by your locality and that you were adhering to that. I believe that was the case in that situation. But also if you want to make changes to that, through your Board of Supervisors, there is a process for that and there are timeframes for that have to occur.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. And Delegate Glass.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In previous year's briefing, you mentioned that there were scheduled projects that were delayed due to legislative mandates. I'm wondering if that's still the case, if there are any projects that are being delayed because of what we do here, and if so, what can we do to fix that?
So I think that anytime you come into an agency, it's a target-rich environment for projects that need to be carried out. When we have new legislation, that takes the priority, as you mentioned, because it has an enactment date and it has to be in place by a certain time. Right now, our focus has been in making our data better and in building a new system and making sure the system that we have is going to get us through the presidential. Are there other projects that we could be focusing on if we weren't building a new system? Of course there are, but I feel like we are focused on the priorities we need to be focused on at the moment. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, and we actually need to go to our next speaker, but I do have more questions in the queue. If you could stick around, we know that, you have a lot of work, but I think that some members might have questions for you and they can come to you individually after the meeting. But thank you for your presence here and for the information. If you could make the slides available, that would be extremely helpful for us to be able to refer back to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is coming to us virtually. Secretary Trey Grayson previously served 2 terms as Kentucky Secretary of State, and he served as president of the National Association of Secretaries of State and chair of the Republican Secretaries of State Association. He currently works as a partner in Florence, Kentucky office of Frost Brown Todd, where he leads the lobbying and public policy practice group. Among the organizations with which he has been active include the Bipartisan Presidential Commission on Election Administration, Unite America, the Center for Election Innovation and Research, and the Secure Elections Project. And after leaving the Secretary of State's office, he served as the director of Harvard University's Institute of Politics. Secretary Grayson, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Chair Price. Appreciate the invitation. It's good to be with all of you, especially as you are starting to kick off this legislative session. It's also always good to talk to other folks who reside in a Commonwealth. There are only 4 of us, and the other states need to get their act together. So I'm coming to you from the Commonwealth of Kentucky and appreciate all of you. I want to begin with just some general observations about elections in America. Unfortunately, right now we've got high levels of distrust, and in some cases even hostility towards our election system, as well as those election administrators. We've had a number of close elections over the past few years, presidential, local, state, legislative, and we've just seen growing political divides, and it's just created a lot of tension. Unfortunately for election administrators, like your general registrars and the county clerks in Kentucky, they're starting to receive credible threats on their lives. Just about a week or 2 ago, hundreds of bomb threats, for example, were called in to election offices all across the country in a coordinated manner. Some of these threats have been serious enough to result in criminal indictment. So there's a lot of pressure coming from constituents and citizens on those who are trying to just do their best to run our elections. In addition, we've had foreign bad actors try to step in and engage in our election process as well. So there's just a lot of challenges that officials face, like Commissioner Beals, like your general registrars, like folks across the country. So, as you're beginning your legislative session and we're starting a very, presidential year, and it sounds like you're just getting ready to start to vote in your presidential primary, I thought I'd offer a few thoughts about what's kind of going on in the policy landscape across the country and perhaps some recommendations that you all can consider over the next few months during your session. First of all, like every state is in a little bit of a different spot, and I wouldn't hold myself out as a Virginia election expert. I know a lot about what's going on across the country. I'm very involved still, but I don't know all the nuances of what's taking place in Virginia. But one advice I would have is, given the high turnout, and as Commissioner Beals showed, the presidential turnout is meaningfully higher in Virginia. The 2020 election was significantly higher than the last couple of years. That's true all across the country, even in non-battleground states. So I want you to keep that in mind as you're thinking about policy changes that you might consider in this environment or in this year. But there's some good things that are going on all across the country that I think, we've seen trends over the last couple of decades, including in Virginia, to offer voters more options to vote, to register, to get registered, and to participate in advance of Election Day. Nearly every state has gradually modernized, and I use the term modernized because I think this is a good thing, to kind of vote the way we live. That was the phrase that I used when I was Secretary of State in Kentucky. We need to vote the way we live. People are used to having this flexibility and options. They need them. And so I applaud Virginia and the states across the country for doing that. But one challenge I think that we've always seen, even with some of these improvements, is funding. I think I feel confident in saying that there's probably no elections jurisdiction in the country that receives sufficient funding. And as a result, election administrators at the local level, and let's face it, that's where elections are actually run, are understaffed, under-resourced. We've also seen technology in the election space not develop quite as robustly. We haven't seen as many innovations as we've seen in tech and other areas. And so one thing I would urge you to do, and this is maybe more of a long-term thought, is stepping up funding so that we can have better pay, so our election officials can stay in jobs because it's more of a career. There was a reference, the commissioner talked about the perennial challenge of poll worker recruitment. If you have more money, you can do targeted marketing, you can increase the poll worker pay. So money really could help improve our election system. And as I said, there's no state that couldn't do a better job of that. I think one of the things that I really always talk to election administrators, I work closely with the county clerks in Kentucky, is, what are your pain points? What are the little laws that don't make a lot of sense? Or the court cases that aren't reflected on your books, this is how you operate an election, but the law doesn't say that. However, a court ruling or Attorney General's opinion tells you to do it, is to do these kinds of cleanup bills. Utah calls these things continuous improvement bills, to kind of pick up on that manufacturing philosophy. Every year we're going to pass some legislation to fix little things in our election. These are not legislations that are designed to dramatically change elections, just to fix things, to make them more transparent so people can understand how they work better. And I love that phrase, continuous improvement. And so I encourage folks across the country. We're gonna do that in Kentucky, especially because that's a Japanese manufacturing concept, and Toyota's first manufacturing plant in America is in Georgetown, Kentucky. So we're used to that phrase and we're going to use it. So I think a continuous improvement bill is something you ought to do every year. There's little things that can be done. A number of states are looking at their protections for election workers. Are there things that can be done? Oklahoma last year passed a pretty well-regarded set of reforms. Are there things to protect election workers from some of these threats that are necessary on the books? Look at your laws, make sure that those are in place. I know that Virginia is now doing some risk limiting post-election audits. Not all states are doing that, and some are rolling them out gradually. Probably not something you want to adopt from whole hog in a presidential election, but you can do some piloting, you can do some tweaks. But that's something that can instill confidence in voters, that you're checking the tech, you're checking the math, and that you do that without having to go to a full-blown recount. And that just becomes part of elections. So that's an important reform, and I'm glad to see that Virginia is doing it. One thing that happened in the fall of 2022 is local election administrators all across the country were bombarded by open records requests or FOIA requests or whatever the law is called in your own state. Many of these were from folks who had no idea what they were asking for. They just cut and paste, put a request in. When they were asked follow-up questions, they didn't know the answers. And unfortunately, it came at a really bad time, right as the planning for the fall election was kicking into high gear and machines are being programmed and poll workers are being recruited and trained. It put a lot of stress on these offices. So one thing I think it's worth considering, and you could do that this year, is what are the kinds of election records that ought to be subject to the public? I mean, I think FOIA and open records laws are really important to instill confidence in government in general. But in elections, you have the concern about protecting the privacy of the vote and also some level of personal identifying information. And so what should be public? Should a ballot be public? Should an image be public? Because maybe you can tie that ballot to an individual, especially in a low turnout election. And what does your Constitution say about things like that? But then the other question is, what's the best way to get that out there? Maybe the better way to distribute those records that you think should be made public is through a state agency. They may be better positioned, for example, because of electronic poll books that all run up to the state capitol. It may be better for the state to disseminate some of that information. Or in some cases, like in Florida, they even just put a lot of this online. And so if they ever get a request, they just point to people online. So what should be available, how it should be made available, I think those are some good reforms and a good conversation to have. And then finally, the last thing I would say is looking at your procedures to see, and I don't think Virginia doesn't strike me as a state that falls into this category, but other states do. How can we get unofficial results, because obviously certified results come a couple weeks later, but the unofficial results as quickly as we can that are accurate? And so are there barriers to, in some states they can't, they have heavy mail-in voting, but they can't process absentee ballots in advance? Do you have enough resources to process them once you received? I think one of the challenges is when we have these narrow elections and people are looking and their votes still haven't been completely counted in the days and sometimes even weeks, in the case of California, after election, it causes people to have some questions about the process. And so I think the quicker we can get those results, unofficial results, out and final, without sacrificing the quality and accuracy of that count, it's critically important. And that's something that on the margins can be done. So I just want to conclude by thanking all of you. I mentioned at the top the challenges on election administrators. And then I just will say that, like, as somebody who served 2 terms as an elected statewide office, what election officials and elected officials in general are going through today, I just can't fathom. It's a very different world from when I was in office. But I thank you for stepping up to serve. I suspect some of you have gotten some threats, had some uncomfortable conversations, received some texts and emails, and maybe in some in-person threats and allegations and things like that. It's a hard time, and I applaud you for stepping up and doing it, and I wish you the best of luck this session. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your remarks, Mr. Secretary. We have time for maybe one question. Are there any questions from the committee? Delegate Green.
Yes, Mr. Secretary, I have a question. Does Kentucky have early absentee voting? And if so, how many days of early absentee voting do you allow?
So Kentucky just adopted in-person early voting, so no excuse early voting. We only have 3 days. This was something, I work with the county clerks now, and this is something that after the 2020 election, we temporarily allowed unlimited vote by mail and unlimited early vote, well, several days of early voting. After the election, the Republicans and Democrats came together and passed a bill, and we ended up with 3 days of early voting. So it's the Thursday, Friday, Saturday of before the election. So no early voting on Sunday, no early voting on Monday. That allows the locals to get done. We're gradually seeing an uptick in support of that. There are some senators actually there's a bill that's gotten a couple co-sponsors to get rid of that. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I think the voters really like it. But it is something we've put our toes in the water. Kentucky had been a very traditional state in the sense of you needed to have an excuse to vote on election day. So I'm excited about that reform. We also added vote centers in that bill so we can, be a little more efficient in how we administer elections at the local level. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions. So, Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for your time this morning and for the remarks you offered.
Thank you for the invitation. And if anybody has any questions, you can probably find me online and shoot me an email, and I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. And I do want to quickly recognize the presence of a voting rights champion here in our audience. Congressman Bobby Scott from the 3rd Congressional District is in the room. Thank you for visiting with us today. And also, due to our time constraints, I would entertain a motion to pass by House Bill 40 and House Bill 126 for the day in block.
So moved, Madam Chair.
It's been moved and properly seconded to take the bills by for the day. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Those bills have been taken by for the day. That is all of the business that we had before us. So I'll now entertain a motion to adjourn. It's been moved and properly seconded that we adjourn for the day. All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Thank you for your attention. We are now adjourned.